So I want to start talking about regulating the internet. You happy to get started? Take a seat. A few people have asked me when we finish. A few people will have to walk out before we finish, which if you could just do so as quietly as you can, I would appreciate that. Our drop dead time is 5:30. I think I'm probably likely to go till then, knowing me. But if you do need to leave beforehand, that's fine. And if I can finish a bit earlier than that, it's such a nice day, I will try and do so. So, let's start. With the topic, regulating the internet, what do you think we're going to talk about? Some of you have the benefit of the slides in front of you, I get that.
Please
The norms of acceptable
Norms of acceptable behaviour on the internet?
correct.
So how we regulate that?
Sorry, the norms of acceptable, like I'm not criticising the comment, it's just the concept of there being normal behaviour on the internet. Crack me up.
I don't know that he said normal, he said norms.
Yeah.
So, but yeah, it's the question of regulating behaviour.
Well, we have social behaviour and what's expected. Obviously, the medium is a different environment. However, one would expect that there would be some acceptable traits.
Well, we have at the end of the day norms of acceptable behaviour on the street, to a certain extent within your house. There is some behaviour that is acceptable and unacceptable as far as the law is concerned. Between parties and contracts, the law steps into a number of those areas. And the law has been grappling over the last 30 odd years with how to step in relation to the internet. But where I want to go initially is actually even more basic than that. Before we talk about how people behave, I want to give you a broad overview of what the internet is, who owns it, how it regulates itself, and similar type questions. So, in fact, here's a slide I prepared earlier. This is why I hate working with slides. So, we will talk about what the internet is, how and whether it's different from the World Wide Web, who owns and controls it, how it's used, and then we'll end up with how laws work. And these are the kinds of questions that we'll be asking ourselves over each of these intensives. So, I'm already forgetting what I've got on my slides as they go forward. Let me have a look. So, start off with that question, what is the internet and is it different from the World Wide Web? Any thoughts? Marcus?
Decentralised information.
Decentralised information. So that's the internet.
It's like a public space.
The internet is like a public space. Look at me. Even though I am recording, by the way, but like I can't help myself but repeat what people say for the recording. Wish I didn't have to make a recording. Anyway. And you're exactly right. The internet is a net, a web, and a set of infrastructure of connected devices that allow communications using what are called IP protocols, internet protocols, between different devices. That was initially established as an academic network and then essentially morphed into or became part of security, US government security infrastructure. The idea that messaging that could go from one place to another through multiple channels, that meant that if one channel essentially got bombed, there would still be other ways of communicating. So the World Wide Web, again, we use this kind of net web analogy because when you see a picture of what the web looks like, and I'll show you some shortly, you see these sort of spider web connections between things. So World Wide Web, term that was coined by the so-called inventor of the World Wide Web, Sir Timothy Berners-Lee, back in, I'm thinking mid-90s, but I probably should have written it down because I don't remember. So what is the web itself? What distinguishes the web from the internet?
Wasn't the web a closed network used at CERN?
Wasn't the internet a closed network used at CERN, or the web?
Yeah,
So,
the World Wide Web is when he made it open source.
so initially the internet was effectively closed in the sense that, well, there was the CERN area, which is essentially a military area, but there were also the academic users. So there was a web of connected IP protocol connected machines that started as the academic network, and it was closed in the sense that you needed to actually be a member of that club, military or academic, to join it. But by the time the World Wide Web came into being, because the initial idea of the internet was, let's not have one single controller, let's have it as open as we can, but encrypt or keep the channels between particular users private. It's always been a very open network. So the World Wide Web was really the introduction of the use of domain names. So instead of having to type in an internet protocol, so basically 4 groups of numbers, and you would have seen these IP addresses, they're called. Your printer has one, every device that's connected to the web has one. They're made up of 4 groups of numbers. So each group is a number between 0 and 255. Don't ask me why. That's just the highest number it is. Each one of them is unique. So Tim Berners-Lee essentially came up with this idea, well, 2 ideas. One was this idea of hyperlinking. So being able to see some words, click on those words and go to the place that those words suggested. And the use of domain names. So a domain name, what is a domain name? rmit.edu.au is a domain name. So the domain part of it is the unique part that belongs to the business or the institution. So in that case, RMIT. And then we have some separate parts of it, and I'll talk about those as we get down the track. But essentially what that domain name does, so a domain name is then registered with a domain name registrar. And the registrar essentially keeps a database that links a domain name with an IP address or a URL, a universal resource locator. And what that means is that instead of having to remember 255.123.456.4, you can type in rmit.edu.au and it will take you to the place that you want to go. So the web is really around the connections using language and HTML in order to connect different parts of the, to go to different places on the internet. The internet itself is the infrastructure layer that sits underneath. So let's talk about who owns the internet now. Who's in charge? I like this quote that comes from the Internet Society, one of the oldest players in this space. No one is, but everybody is. So what's interesting about the internet is unlike, and we think of the internet now as infrastructure. Any of you who followed the NBN process and the rollout of the NBN and the different political statements about what Australia's broadband network should look like and what it should entail, would be very aware that we think about the internet or connectivity to the internet now as being a kind of infrastructure. In fact, there's a kind of meme that goes around. Any of you aware of Maslow's hierarchy of needs? Most people put Wi-Fi down the bottom below keeping warm and being well fed these days. So unlike most infrastructure, so things like telephone networks, electricity, etc., those things generally in a country were initially owned by the government or a monopoly provider. But the internet itself is tens of thousands of interconnected networks run by almost as many service providers, involving many businesses where there is no single provider in control. As much as we like to bag the largest telephone provider in this country, they do not run the internet. And ultimately, individual companies, universities, governments, and many others are involved in the control of the internet. It's very hard these days to extract yourself entirely from the internet, but there is no one owner. Which brings us to that question: if there's no one owner, then there's no one place in which the internet happens, and no one set of rules by which it operates. So, very small text. So what does a technical infrastructure look like? What is it like? It's a network of networks, and it operates around the world as if it were one network. So we have some significant pieces of pipe, optical fibre pipe, that connect different parts, different countries' internet or connected networks with each other. But at the end of the day, there are multiple networks that operate as if they were one network. They have some pretty common characteristics on the whole, and there are exceptions to this, and this is actually an area I haven't seen here. Thinking about it is the extent to which, and actually it might come out in your group, the extent to which in other countries where the internet isn't as open, or this idea about whether the internet can be closed, whether the use of VPNs and other technologies can influence, if governments can influence the information that their citizens have access to. So, like policy, the technical coordination of the internet has some common characteristics. That is, that the technology itself is open, it's independent, and it's run in each place where there is a domain name authority anyway, run by non-profit membership organisations that work together, in theory at least, to meet the needs of everyone. Now, there are many, many commentators who say one of the reasons why the internet has grown the way it has and has become such a sustaining part of our infrastructure globally is precisely because of that. Because it is open and it is self-regulated, and that it's not doesn't have the significant influence of one government or another. So governments in different jurisdictions might influence access to the internet, might influence the extent to which its citizens can use different sites that are deployed through the internet, but the actual internet itself and the internet technology is entirely open. Were you trying to get my attention there, or? Sorry, sometimes random hand movements throw me. So, have a look at the picture. It's a little bit hard to see there, but what I'm trying to demonstrate here is the ecosystem for the internet involves a large number of different components. So we have, for example, technical standard bodies. So in this, I'm just trying to see, so in this slide, that would be the stuff that's in the blue. So technical standard bodies that provide an ongoing or a consistent approach to the naming of websites, for example. The use of internet protocols and how they communicate with each other. There's no point in this getting too technical, and to be quite frank, most of you will be able to drown me in technical language if you want to try. But every technical piece of infrastructure requires some sort of messaging protocol that allows communication to go through it. The opening and closing of ports. It's no accident that the word port comes from the word for window and relates to the place in which a connection is made, where information or data can travel through from one system into another. We also have organisations that manage resources for global naming and addressing. So they include the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers, commonly known as ICANN. You'll see it coming up in the cases over and over again, including its operation of the Internet Assigned Numbers Authority, IANA, and the Regional Internet. So no one organisation dealing with everything. These organisations, all not-for-profit, all community-driven, deal with each other for different elements. You have registries and domain name registries and registrars. So one of the ones that we'll see quite a bit is AuDA. So the AU stands for Australia. DA is for Domain Authority. So AuDA deals with disputes relating to domain names, amongst other things. We also have network infrastructure, so domain name service providers. So up until the early 2000s in Australia, all domain names were distributed under the authority of one company, Melbourne IT. So it's actually part of, going back to the academic roots, it was part of Melbourne University. It was actually Melbourne University's IT department, basically got to be the Australian distributor of initially URLs or IP addresses prior to the web, and then the allocation of domain names. Many people believe that one of the reasons why in Australia there has been fewer, I'm not sure if that's a sentence, there have been substantially lesser number of cyber squatting, typo squatting and other similar disputes. So disputes between two people about who should use a domain name, because Melbourne IT started very early on with some fairly strict controls over who could have a domain name allocated to them. We'll talk about that a bit more as we go forward. But over time, again, recognising the openness of the internet, and as domain names themselves became quite valuable commodities, there's been a real growth in the number of entities that are authorised to be domain name registrars. And a domain name registrar just does that. It checks, does this domain name already exist? Do you have the right to use it? And then it enters that new name onto a register, grants a license to somebody to use it, and we'll come back to that, and maintains the registry. And you can move from one registrar to another, and all of it's recorded on WHOIS. Very important component of the internet ecosystem are the users. And I know it's a bit of a joke. Have any of you ever seen the fabulous musical Avenue Q? So you know that the internet is for porn. And the adult industry was one of the first adopters of the use or the commercialisation of the internet in a big way. Not far behind them were gambling institutions. And whilst nowadays there's a lot more mainstream commerce happening on the internet, a great deal of what we see and do on the internet and the way that commerce has evolved have been out of innovations that have come from gambling and the pornography industries in particular, for good and for bad. So, because as they were asking this question, how do we monetize the internet? How do we make money out of this? Different ways of using the internet and different technologies evolved. And if you haven't seen Avenue Q, I would, in a safe place, go to YouTube and Google "The Internet is for Porn" and watch that amazing song because it's quite gorgeous. Avenue Q, yeah, just in case. That's a very good piece of advice. So, smooth operation of the internet depends on a global, coordinated, community-driven approach to managing key shared resources. And essentially, I think this, again, from the Internet Society, is as good a connection of how these separate but connected things are dealt with. And each of these are ultimately, other than perhaps or some of the registries, are really not-for-profit enterprises. And it's worth thinking about that. So we don't have a government working out what the rules are. We have these not-for-profit enterprises working out what the rules are, both at a technical level and then at a use level. So as lawyers, that gets us to thinking, well, what is this? It's not regulation if it's not made by a government. Is it contract? Well, that's all right when stuff is happening in a jurisdiction that has the kind of view of what a contract is that we have, that maybe there is this combination. We've got, have to work out what the offer and acceptance might be, because really these are standard form contracts. The whole very nature of an open system is that we publish how we're going to do things and nothing is negotiated, which is kind of an anathema to common law contract just generally. And maybe we have consideration in, at the end of the day, open doesn't necessarily mean free. People are paying money to access services and use them in a particular way, and services are being provided in extreme, and services and in some cases physical infrastructure, so we might have goods there as well. Doesn't fit neatly into that regime either. And so it does leave us questioning, what the hell are we doing here? The biggest thing that's happening in the world doesn't actually really fit neatly into a legal system. What does that mean? These are the kind of laws or these kind of approaches I want you to think about. I'm not sure if you can see this. I really like this little picture, even though it's badly drawn, because I think it basically explains how the internet works better than most things. So it starts off with the user, who is the king, saying to the browser, who is the little surf person, bring me google.com. At which point, the browser goes to the firewall and produces something that says, I'm allowed to go outside. An encryption key or some other thing, they're using the word passport there, goes out the gate into the internet. When it gets out onto the internet, goes down the road and it finds the DNS server and it says, I'm looking for google.com. .au, is it? No, do google.com. And the DNS server basically turns that into an IP address. Again, notice 4 numbers, 4 groups of numbers, no single number more than 255. No negatives. Once it knows what that number is, the browser can continue to go off until it finds a server that has that IP address. Hosting servers there, that's what that information does. The website then says, okay, send back some information. Gives basically, we know Google, asks you to sign in. If you want to sign in, you can use I'm feeling lucky and you can do an advanced search. So off the little surfing man goes and comes back and repeats that same message. All of that happens in the blink of an eye. In fact, Google will even tell you how long it took for it to do its search, because in fact, mostly we don't even bother about going to Google, we just put in our search term into the internet. And that's what happens. So I don't know if I don't think I've ever talked anyone through a cartoon before. That was a first for me. I'm not looking at the thing to find out how confused you are. What other kinds of terminology are relevant here? Peer-to-peer. What does peer-to-peer mean?
Between two independent parties.
Two independent parties.
Correct.
So it's a direct communication. Peers are exactly, we have you have peers in this room. I hope one day to be a peer to all of you. You have a peer-to-peer communication. That's a one-on-one communication. So we can use the internet to have one-on-one communication, so private cloud or otherwise. So I can connect, for example, to using a peer-to-peer network to my own organisation and check my email and talk to people inside the organisation. I might be using the internet to create that path. I might be using a physical piece of technology. I might actually just be connecting my computer with one of those blue cords straight into that environment. Another term we'll come across a lot is cloud computing. What's the cloud?
Virtual storage.
It's out there. It's the stuff that's out there, she's saying. A virtual storage space. So what does that mean?
It's an undefined.
Well, at the end of the day, we still know we're not. Information is still stored. So servers, there need to be servers somewhere. Going back to my little cartoon drawing. So we got to the server host with those lovely little birdie pictures there. Imagine each of those is a computer. So data still needs to be stored somewhere. It's unlike electricity, which you can't really store. It can only travel places. Data needs to be somewhere. Very hard to eradicate it once it's been somewhere. It's like the dirty washing, it's the beetroot stain of the world. But it still needs to sit somewhere. So the cloud is really this idea of distributed servers, or servers that sit in a place that don't belong to the organisation. So you can have private cloud, where there are a set of servers that are dedicated to your organisation that sit somewhere. My guess is, I don't know, that RMIT's private cloud servers sit somewhere on St Kilda Road. And the reason that I know that is the number of times that I go and I lose my iCloud password and on my iPad, and I then go and change it, and a note comes up on my iPhone saying somebody at St Kilda Road is trying to log into your system. I think, that's because I'm on the Wi-Fi system at the university, and that's me, and I just did it myself. So there's a private cloud. So the physical infrastructure that the university's data is sitting on isn't here, it's not in this building. It may not actually be in St Kilda Road. That might just be the gateway to where it's sitting in Singapore or somewhere else, because I'm thinking there'd be a lot of servers belonging to this university, and it would probably be quite expensive to have them all here. My guess is, again, I don't know, that whatever is here, there would be a replicated set of servers somewhere else that are copying that each time. So if one goes down, we've got a backup. I don't know, I just lost my email address. Chances are it's all gone to hell in a handbasket. But that's, again, I'm guessing, I don't know. Universities tend to be quite open, so it might be that it's public cloud as well. Google is notoriously secretive about where its servers are, because it operates part of the cloud. So one of the things that you can do is buy from Google or Amazon, or it's called Azure, but we're talking about Microsoft, space on their servers in the cloud. That does not necessarily mean that you get one computer that's dedicated to you, Basically, your data could be distributed across many computers, but it's sitting in what we call the cloud. Make sense? Ben, I can never tell whether Ben's confused or just wants me to move on. It's usually the second. What's next? Web 2.0. We started talking a minute ago about this idea of Web 2.0. YouTube. And we started talking about the World Wide Web. So Web 2.0 is really the next generation, when we move just from hypertext, from linking from one place to another, to being able to interact with the web. But now there's more and more talk about Web 3.0, or the semantic web. Any ideas there? Essentially, instead of linking documents or linking sites to each other, the initial web is just HTML, link to link. Then we go link to sites and interactive material. Now we're talking about links to data. So the semantic web is where you might be going to a website and capturing data from multiple points. So instead of going from one bridge to another place, you might even be staying on the same website, but multiple data points are coming into the one place. Does it matter? Probably not.
Could you provide an example? Because I'm not really...
Provide an example. So, I'm trying to think what it's called. There's a research product that you can use called... Oh, it's going to bug me in a second. I'll bring it up and show you later. But what you can do is look at all of your different data points. So I can say, okay, I've got a Gmail account of my own. I've also got a university Gmail account. I've got let me use this as a good example. I use a tool called CLOSE, C-L-O-Z-E, which is like a CRM, or a customer relationship management. Is that what it is, CRM? I can't remember. It's customer client relationship management tool. So it's a bit like that. I think that's what it's built for. But I've just got so many different email addresses. I can go to one website that checks all of my email addresses, and then it says, okay, here's Martha. I found Martha. And then it can say, okay, I'm just at the same time I'll go and look and see if she's on Facebook or Twitter or whatever, and I can connect all of those accounts. And so when I bring up my Martha account, I haven't done this, but I might now, I can see all of the emails she sent me, regardless of what email account she's used or I've used, and the latest thing that she posted publicly on Facebook and maybe her LinkedIn profile. So I've got a bit of information. I can make another note there. I could link her to a document or something. So it's just, I'm in one website, but it's going out to multiple places. Is that an example?
Really handy.
Really handy. Could be creepy.
Yes.
But again, and this is something I find really interesting, just to go off on a... I think that there is this kind of diagram here where we've got on one side like usefulness, so like, and then we've got creepiness.
Yes.
And I don't know, you can tell I've done an MBA because I think of everything in 4 boxes essentially, but and so when we're asked the question, should we give our data to these people, like, well, how useful is it to me right now, as opposed to how creepy do I think that the end user of this data might be. So think about it, we give LinkedIn quite a lot of data about ourselves because we think it's quite useful to us, but then also, and we don't find it particularly creepy because we feel like we have some control over that, maybe. I don't know. Facebook, on the other hand, was constantly asking me questions, and then obviously talking to Google too, because it knows what I searched for. And you search for something dumb on Google, you've got a Facebook account because you need it for like I searched for a hypnotist once. And it was a good I can't remember what it was a good reason. I am constantly getting like ads from people who do hypnotism. It's like, I need to go and search for puppies and unicorns or something, just so that I get more interesting stuff. So yeah, but if I go and it's a vendor of unicorn related trivia is asking me for lots of information about myself, I think, well, actually I don't really want that, and it's quite creepy, so maybe that sits up here. And I think that we do have this kind of personal algorithm where we're working that out, but we don't realise necessarily how many different people can aggregate all of the information that we put on the web. I find that quite personally interesting.
I think what's also interesting around that, sorry, Kat, is that it changes what when it changes. Like LinkedIn when it first started versus now when it's being used as a recruitment tool and taking your information.
Well, you do know that LinkedIn is now owned by Microsoft.
Yeah. So that kind of shift without.
And I think I find it, as somebody involved in universities, I find that really interesting because, you know, Microsoft is one of the greatest providers in the education space. LinkedIn is a recruitment / education tool. So LinkedIn also itself owns SlideShare, which I'm sure many of you will have used. All of that data can be pulled together by the same organisation. But yeah, and you give your data at one point for one reason, but the way that as the science changes and the maths changes, that information can be used for many different purposes later. Good, bad, I don't know. I personally am probably way too slack with personal information on the internet. Anthropologists of the future will love me, like, you know, I've got my Fitbit on, I've got my Apple Watch, like every heartbeat and every step is being recorded, it's all with GPS, I can, you know, all sorts of stuff is going on. But, you know, I just think, can't beat them, join them, get the benefit of it. Internet of Things, speaking of, what is the Internet of Things? Mark?
Other the internet using non-informational things like turning on your lights.
Devices that connect to the internet.
Yeah, air conditioning,
And
so
yes.
you see buses at home, or smart home readers, or security systems.
Security systems. So many things connect to the internet now. Your car, your watch, your fridge. I'm quite sure why your fridge needs to connect to the internet. And yet it still can't clean itself. I don't understand. So devices that connect to the internet, there's some really interesting stuff that's happening in that space. Some of the research this university is involved in, over in the School of DSC, Design and Social Context, I think is the name of the college. The media people there who do a lot of work in gamification. So gamification has been a bit of a buzzword the last few years. The extent to which we can use what we've learnt about the way people use electronic games, essentially, to change the nature of people's behaviour. So one of the biggest research programs that the university had a couple of years ago was looking at how do we keep people awake in driverless cars? What kind of what can we learn from gaming technologies, for example, to make sure that we keep people awake when they're driving, quote unquote, a driverless car? One of the things that I found really interesting is, did you know, I did not know this myself until I learned about it, that it costs a bit more than $1 million to give somebody a double lung heart transplant. About that. When you need a double lung heart transplant, you are really, really sick. Like it's not optional surgery, right? And you are really sick up until pretty much the minute you wake up from the anaesthetic with your new heart lung, unless the organ is rejected. So you go from being really sick to really quite well very, very quickly. However, if you don't take your medicine every day at exactly the right time, when you had a double lung heart transplant, you can break it really easily. And that's $1 million worth of stuff in your body. And a lot of people have worked very hard, not to mention the family of a loved one who no longer needs their double lung and heart. Don't think about it too hard. That you are letting down. So a lot of work has been going into, essentially, to me it sounds like, did any of you are all about the right age? I think did you have those little Tamagotchis that you had to feed at the right time? Being the mother of a child who had a Tamagotchi in the, mid-90s, it was pretty stressful when that Tamagotchi wasn't in. Learning from that kind of experience as to how to make sure people take their medicine on time. But then also with Internet of Things technology, being able to feed information back into a kind of virtual computer. Now, and it's really interesting. They've been doing it at the Alfred, and they're creating this kind of hologram tree. And the branches of the tree are different kinds of patients, so that doctors and nurses can visualize who's taking their medicine effectively and what the impact is, which branches are strong, which ones aren't. So there's very visuals, gamification on both sides, not just to encourage you to take your medicine, but to inspire those who are saving lives. Now, some people might think that's a big waste of time and effort. I'm not one of them, but I do like a pretty picture. I think there's some really interesting stuff happening there. NBN, National Broadband Network, we spoke about it a little minute or two ago. Questions, concerns? So looking at the infrastructure that brings us the information. So, okay, I want to talk about the words in this context, free and open source. Because we need to be very clear on what those things mean. I've already used open in the sense of open technologies a couple of times. Open source software, what does that mean? Has anybody used open source software? Yeah, got some over here. What is it?
Software that people write and just put out there for you to use, and you take it and you can rewrite it if you feel so it's
Yep, so it's open in the sense that you can download it and see it, you can see the code behind it. So mostly when we use software, we only see the front end of the software. We don't see the code that creates it. So if I'm using Microsoft Word, for example, I'm just using the functionality of the software. I don't actually see any of the code that wrote that software. Microsoft Word or Office, that's closed software. It's not open in the sense that I can't see the code. Where open source, I can get in there, I can change the code if I want to. Is it free?
Star Office.
Star Office is a really good example. So not only can you use the software, but you can go in behind it and you can change the code if you want to. And in that case, is Star Office free?
You pay for support
some of them you do pay.
So some of them there is no cost at all. If you change the code, can you do that without doing anything at all?
You can, but
You can. Should you do anything?
for your computer you can. It may
Yeah.
not be accepted.
On your computer you can. But if you then want to take Star Office, for example, go in and change the code a little bit, or even not at all, and then resell it as Stuart's Office.
Well, Star Office you couldn't. I mean, I imagine there's maybe some open source software that's completely Creative Commons free, but
So why couldn't I with Star Office? Because this is the point I'm trying to get to. Why couldn't you put it on a CD and just set up a little stall down the bottom there in the cafeteria? Instead of buying fizzy water, you could buy.
You actually probably do that. It would just be not within the spirit of the.
I'm sure it's not within the spirit of open source. It's also.
And how would they go to?
Yeah, for
That'd
the
be a breach of
licensing,
contract.
actually, if you were doing commercial use of it, you have to pay that.
So again, open source, sometimes it means free and absolutely free, as in from a consideration point of view. Usually what it means is free to change with attribution, depends on which license it comes with. So if you were to change the code, quite often you could take that and use it in one of your tools. So I'm, as many of you know, I've been involved in a financial services technology company, we use some open source, particularly APIs. So APIs are just bits of software that essentially let one piece of software talk to another piece of software or interact. Why write one when there's one you can use for free? If you don't change it, in most cases, or in many cases, you don't have to do anything, you can just use it. Okay, often software providers or database providers in particular will actually create open source APIs just to make it easy for you to use their pay-for tool. In some cases, people are writing those things and they will say, yeah, use it for as long as you like, test it, but if you use it for a commercial purpose, then you have to pay for it. In some cases, you can use it without payment or with payment and change it, but you need to make sure, particularly if you're distributing it, that you distribute the original versions with attribution for the original authors. So open software is all about what the license says. So the GNU, I'm going to forget there are lots of TLAs in this area of practice, TLA meaning 3-letter acronym, and I can't remember what GNU stands for. It's general something. Anybody know? Anyway, the GNU is one of the most popular open source licenses. But when you hear open source, don't assume, because tech people will tell you, oh, it's free. You know, I can get in there and I can use it. It's free. It's not always free. And even when it's free in terms of cash, it may not be free in terms of other terms.
It stands for General Public License, apparently.
Pardon?
I don't know where the U comes from, but
General
Public License.
Public License, but it's called GNU, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. And they really don't.
So, and again, the GNU itself, and look, it might have been originally in another language. This can happen. There are also open source licensing. So the open source community is quite active, and there are different types of open source licenses, and it kind of makes sense to use an existing open source license than to create your own, because it's more likely to be understood and followed. They're pretty simple. Another word we come across a lot is the word platform. In this context, what do you think a platform is in the context of the internet?
Different devices.
The language it shares.
Languages shares. Let me give you an example of a platform. In the olden days when you had a shop, actually what about a school? Let's use a school. What we're doing right now, in some senses, the university is a platform. So it provides a place where many of you can come and listen to and learn from one person at a time. The internet itself creates a platform for communication. In the past, you went to school, your only option was to come at a particular time on a particular day, and a lecture would happen at a particular time. Now, when we have the internet, RMIT can provide a technology platform for coming to school. So you can actually forget about the time. You can be one person going through the platform and then interacting with many, or you can be many people interacting with many, or many people interacting with one. Banking services. When you bank online, you are interacting with the bank's technology platform for essentially doing what the teller used to do when you were constrained by the lack of the internet. Financial services is probably the area where platform technologies have been the most prevalent, because there is a necessity in financial services for security. It's money that's moving around, people's money, and people have there's a many-to-one relationship between a bank and each of its customers, but there are also many banks that need to interact on the one platform. So when you think about when you go to an ATM, if it's not your bank's ATM, they will charge you some money for it usually, unless you've got a good account. But the ATMs themselves are interacting with a platform, a banking services platform. That's the language we use. Is that helpful? feel like I'm being quite inarticulate. Two words that we hear a lot. Didn't see anything very much happening in this space for you guys thinking about different assignments, but this idea of both crowdsourcing and crowdfunding. Are they the same thing? So what is the crowd in an internet sense? Users, people. And one of the beauties of the internet is because we do have platforms and because processing power has become so much stronger, we can now aggregate information very, very quickly. So one of, I think, the best examples of crowdsourcing in relation to data in particular is Google Maps. Anybody use Google Maps in traffic? And when you're sitting in traffic and you're trying to work out which way to go, and you see big bits of red road, how does it know that?
Because other users are feeding information into it.
Other people are sitting in traffic with their mobile phones, and their mobile phones are pinging a satellite, however in many seconds. And Google Maps says, okay, most days at 10 o'clock at night, those phones reconnect on the basis of 60 kilometres an hour. But right now, they're likely to be 5 kilometres an hour. That suggests, and there's lots of them doing it, that means to me that there's been a hold-up. Crowdsourcing information to give us traffic data. That's basically how it works. It's not your personal information, though it might be. It's just crowdsourced data that allows us to understand what's happening in real time in a way that we really couldn't have 10 years ago. Pretty cool when you think about it. Other really great examples during the Arab Spring, where that was intentional data. People were providing data right up, straight, using social media technologies, but also physical technologies, so that the rest of the world knew where processes were happening. So the work that Marta does here is also around crowdsourcing data in crises. So when there was, the first time this was really used was in the earthquake in Haiti about 7 years ago or so. Can't remember. I'll make sure that the websites are available to you. But people were able to report incidents very quickly to create a kind of global hotspot or a hotspot map of where the worst affected areas were. So that's crowdsourcing, using data, using individual data to create a bigger picture of what the world looks like. Crowdfunding is things like Kickstarter, Posable, Domicom, similar kind of tools like that, where you can use the power of influence or the crowd to support a particular cause or a particular economic venture. I just occasionally see the two terms swapped around, and I think they're quite different, so I just wanted to bring it to your attention. Social networks, anybody heard of those? Yeah, so there's this new thing, it's called Bookface. But there are lots of different social media tools around too, and that changes all the time. So I was kind of joking to myself or laughing. I have recently amassed a large number of 10-year-old friends on Snapchat. Snapchat has a little feature where you can like put puppy dog faces on and stuff, and you can get it's very cute. I'm pretty sure that's not what they had in mind when they invented Snapchat. The first 10-year-old friend who put me onto Snapchat then went around, because it automatically, and all of you would have seen this, it already knows who your friends are who are on Snapchat. So, that's an aggregator. That's part of the semantic web. She then immediately, my son's name is Liam, she immediately made me Snapchat friends with Liam. It turned out Liam was a student who lives in Tasmania. I didn't actually know how to unfriend him. I had to actually ring him and say, yeah, we're not friends on Snapchat, please don't send me anything.
Imagine.
Anyway, he looks a bit like Ned Kelly, so he probably would have been quite a useful Snapchat friend. Luckily, it turns out he hasn't used it because he's not 10. But social networks change, and they interact with each other more and more too. So there are more social media aggregates. So things like Hootsuite, for example, which allow you to upload things to your Facebook page and your Twitter account and all the rest of it. Many people are also using that to aggregate the data that they get back. No doubt there will be other terms that we come across. Just wanted to get us on to the same page. As you think about the terms, which ones are technologies, which ones are business processes, which ones are systems, and does it really matter? So, I mentioned this report to a couple of people as we went. This now makes me think I've definitely uploaded it. So, back in April this year, Malcolm Turnbull released Australia's cybersecurity strategy. So I've taken some data from that document. I think it's useful to us because a lot of these things come back to security to a certain extent. And I think particularly for those of you who want to focus on advising in relation to policy, understanding the context in which policy is already evolving makes sense. But it also provides for some really useful, recent and presumably verified enough statistics as to how we're using the internet in what context. So this is suggesting or saying that 90% of Australians will be online by next year. 2 in 3 Australians have social media accounts. Doesn't say how many different social media accounts they have, but many who have one will have multiple. In social media includes things like LinkedIn. Most Australians spend almost a whole day online per week. That's quite a frightening statistic in some ways, particularly when you consider that that really wasn't possible 20 years ago. A whole day of a week. Now, for some of us, that might be because we're working entirely in the cloud anyway. And I'm thinking I'm spending closer to 7 days, the best part of 7 days a week online in some way. So maybe I'm screwing the percentage. 84% of small and medium businesses in Australia are online. 84%. So it is absolutely mainstream. The market for connected home devices is expected to grow 11-fold by 2019. More than 10 times. And by 2019, so the next 5 years, the average Australian household will have 24 connected devices. So now, how many of you have got a television or a sound system or something that turns on with your voice? No? Yeah. You have one? Yeah. Put your hand up. PS4? Yeah. PS4. Or, something. What about how many of you got a phone with Siri on it?
Actually, yeah, I use that all the time.
So I say, hey Siri.
Yeah.
Hey Siri. No, she's not listening because I put her in. I turned my phone off. Oh no, actually she's listening now. She's saying, hang on. Think about how that technology works. Those devices that are voice activated are listening to you all the time. They're waiting for you to say, hey Siri, hello Alexa, honey, turn on the lights or whatever it is. Any of you watch The Block? It's how the technology enabled Telstra Home. Just waiting to hear how that breaks down. But anyway, I can't get my stereo working. I'm a geek. Those devices are listening to you all the time. They're listening for the algorithm that makes that voice. If they're listening to you all the time, that means they could actually be recording everything that you say. 24 devices. Sorry?
How do we know that they're not?
How do you know that they're not? I don't know how you know. You can ask the manufacturer. They will tell you that they're not, but on the whole, the bad guys don't tell you the truth. So one of the things is, so I'll include some stuff for next week about some of the devices, and there's an argument, you will get a TED talk. There is an argument that is growing in the States that there is a divide between those essentially white and wealthy people who have access to technologies that encrypt, and poor and largely black or Hispanic people in the States who don't have access to those technologies because they're expensive, that are ending up in completely different outcomes when it comes to evidence. So I'm particularly talking about the use of mobile phones. But sorry, I'm looping around. But there was something that came out only last week about some Android phones that are manufactured in China that are sending personal data back to China willy-nilly. You buy your telephone on AliExpress, chances are AliExpress knows a great deal about you already. And yet, so one of the decisions that Apple made a year or two ago now was that it would not unencrypt its data. It would not agree with the Home Office, it was the FBI actually, that it would provide encryption keys to unencrypt data. It basically said, no, you buy our phone, the data is encrypted, that's how it comes, we can't unencrypt it and we won't unencrypt it. The Google, Android, and Microsoft approach has been, well, you can turn on encryption if you want to, but it doesn't come default to encryption, and you need to make a decision. Those phones are cheaper. The ones with encryption are more expensive. And
Google one is not cheaper.
the Google one is not cheaper. The new Google
I
phone.
really want one. It's outrageous.
So Google have recently started bringing out hardware as well. So, but a basic Android phone is a lot cheaper than an iPhone. So if you are a person of interest to the police and your phone can provide information about where you've been, so if you have one of those any of the tracking apps on, which you might not even realise is on, it can tell anybody where you've been. You can look at your email. It can look at, well, in my case, what my heart rate was at the moment of the murder. The adrenaline was spiking.
That would be very
there's the
useful though for
X-rays.
telling time of death.
Yeah. Particularly, well, if I was the
Time and
victim,
location.
time and location of death, there will be no issue. So if any of you guys try to top me today, just remember everything's being recorded. You probably want to take the devices with you. Oh, damn, I shouldn't have said that. So we will have a look at that as well. But the thing is, we do need to think about these technologies. That gone are the days where we can think of each of them as individual issues. That Web 3.0 means that these issues are being aggregated, that data processing power is getting exponentially larger. More than half of the data that has ever been produced by humans has been produced in the last 3 years.
That's all selfies.
A lot of selfies. And a lot of really cute cats. So yes, on that note, actually finding the data that you want as an individual is really difficult. The challenge for you guys as the lawyers of the future is quite a different challenge from the one I had. You know, back in the 80s, all you had to do was go to the library and learn how to work out what the right book might be. These days, finding information is easy. Working out what the right information is, curating that information in a meaningful way is much more difficult. But that will change too. bots are more and more likely to be able to help you with that. So I'm going to flick on to that. That was my little quiz question for you, but some of you have done it. Okay, so how are we doing for time here? Let's have a quick run through this. Let's talk about what some of these main institutions do. So ICANN is basically the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names. It's a non-profit. It's responsible for global coordination of the Internet's unique identifiers, and it's stable operation and safe profits. Sorry, I'm tripping over myself. The stable organisation of the Internet and the development of clear guidelines for the use of domain names. So basically domain names are part of the URL, the Universal Resource Locator. So we've talked a bit about that rmit.edu.au previously. There are these different pieces. So the .au, for example, tells us that it's an Australian domain, that it's one of the domains that has been released by under the Australian Registry. The .com, .edu, .biz, those kind of things, they're our second level domain, and they are administered within the country. So the Australian entity here is AuDA, and it's responsible for the .au domain names and for the .coms, .orgs, .edu. Sorry, I'm sitting and looking at that. It looks like I haven't finished the sentence at that point. ICANN can create domain names for registered trademarks as well. So any name that is registered as a trademark can also be used as a domain name. Any people here who've done intellectual property law? Yep. One. What do we see as the problem with that?
Well, there's a limited number of trademarks, or there could be.
There's a limit. Well, is there? Because you can have a trademark in multiple classes.
That's correct.
So they might be owned by completely different people.
Yeah.
So
So there's the international domain name dispute process.
Yeah.
You can go and sort all that stuff out. If you feel so inspired, you can just go into that.
yeah. So basically, we will talk a little bit about the dispute resolution process. But yeah, there is an international process. There's also a local process. So I'm actually hoping that I've got a mate of mine does. He's with AuDA and has been involved in the development of the local dispute resolution process. So I'm hoping he'll come in and have a chat. It's a little bit difficult with weekends for him. He has small children. So AuDA also responsible for some of the second level domains. So there are some protected domains. So for example, CSIRO. And then more recently the geographic domains. So .vic.au, .nsw, or the most sought after byronbay.au. Some years ago, yeah. Lots of people were pitching for byronbay.au. Another important part of this process is the WHOIS register. Some of you will have used it. So the WHOIS register helps you work out who owns a domain name, sort of. WHOIS provides the name of the registrar, the registrant, their contact name and email address, their technical contact email address, and computers for that domain name, so the IP addresses. But it does not provide creation or expiry dates for the domain name or their telephone, fax, or other details. So you can't find the individual. So I will gloss over here, but you can have a look at the slides. They're just, so far I'm not seeing anybody particularly interested in dealing with domain name disputes, but they will come up from time to time. essentially, since 2001, Australian domain name disputes can be dealt with in Australia. So it's actually been for quite a while. To bring an action under the dispute resolution policy. Oh, sorry.
That's only AuDA is only for .com.au. Like it doesn't cover .com.
No, it's only for local. So it's anything with the AU at the end.
Of qualitative value, I just read a decision in which Marcus lost one of these disputes with the AuDA. So adds to that.
So if I bring Erin in, there might be fisticuffs, because that would be cool. So, well, do you want to share your experience, or?
Yeah, so I registered a domain name in 2007, but it wasn't in the name of the company. And that back then had a lot of value that it doesn't now because of the way the system's changed. But back then, if it was called something that was sort of generic and popular search, it would naturally go to that. So it had some
Okay, so this is what we call in the classic cyber squatting.
Yeah.
We identify a name that we think might have value. Sorry, can I just make you the bad guy just because it's so much more fun?
It wasn't deliberate, it just turned out that's what happens. When I realised that was a good thing. But
No,
long
officer.
story short,
I just happen to have that $100 note covered in white powder in my pocket. I have no idea where it came from.
so in the end, did a joint venture with another company, and I agreed to do certain things, and they agreed to do certain things, and they didn't do what they were meant to do, so I didn't do what I was meant to do. So to win because they wanted the domain, so to win, they those sneaky bastards registered the name, the same name that corresponded with the web address that I had. So, and they just went to AuDA. They paid the $2,500 fee to have a member look at the case, and the member just said, "Well, they've got this company registered on this date 2 weeks ago, and you don't have that."
The name, you don't have that.
Yep, so they won. And that was one way of doing it. You could also have a trademark, or you could have a PTY company.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
So basically, Australia has much stricter rules than much of the rest of the world. So you do need to have something that links you to the name. So it needs to be your company, your trademark, your own name, or an obvious kind of derivation of that. So, for example, if your name is, I'm just trying to think of something that makes sense.
Could be product related.
What used to be the Commonwealth Serum Laboratory was able to register CSL very early on, because commonly it was called by those initials. So I think its name is now officially CSL, and it's been interesting to see that company names have kind of moved towards what their online presence has been over a longer period of time. So, in order to bring an action, you need to prove that the domain name of the other party is identical or confusingly similar to the complainant's name. I've got a company name, that's my name, and your domain name is the same as my company name, even though in this particular case it seems your domain name had been around for a little bit longer. That the current domain name holder has no legitimate rights and interest in the name, and that the domain has been registered and used in bad faith. So, I want to say here, we've actually talked about this. Yeah, so one of the pieces that you have there, so if you go to the AuDA website, you will find its allocation policy. So the domain name allocation policy, and also its dispute resolution policy. Again,
So there's
it's
no
not regulation. No, there is no legislation. This is kind of the point, because the internet is essentially run by consensus. So it's open, not for profit. Different bodies have taken on responsibility for different things. And it's this web of consensus that lets it run in the way that it's being run. Now, there has been legislative involvement from time to time. So the American government, I think actually the government of California, was involved in the early 90s in a decision to to move all of the disputes in relation to domain names then into ICANN, into the UADA. So there have been policy decisions that have been made that have looked at the question of, well, what's the internet for? Does it belong to a country, or is it something that sits across different countries? And as a consequence, it's ended up in this kind of network of consensus. See, I wouldn't even call it contractual. But the reality is, if you don't fit in with the pattern, you're not going to be able to access the internet. Just looking at the time, that might be a good place for us to finish, actually.